I was in my garage at 11:30 on a Tuesday morning, mounting my third server rack to the wall, when I heard the sharp knock that would change everything. My name is Frank Navarro, and I had recently converted half of my two-car garage in Boulder, Colorado into what I affectionately called my digital sanctuary. After 20 years in IT consulting, I had finally taken the plunge into running my own business from home, and that meant proper infrastructure. The knock came again, more insistent this time. I set down my drill and walked to the door, still wearing my safety glasses. Standing on my driveway was Patricia Henderson, president of the Ridgemont Hills Homeowners Association, her blonde bob perfectly styled despite the freezing February wind. She wore a purple North Face jacket that probably cost more than my entire server setup, and her expression suggested she had just discovered something deeply offensive. "Mr. Navarro," she said, her voice dripping with false politeness, "I need to discuss a serious violation with you." I pulled off my safety glasses and wiped my hands on my jeans. "Good morning, Patricia. What can I help you with?" She held up her phone, showing me a photo of my garage taken from the street. The door had been open yesterday while I received a delivery. "This setup you have is completely unacceptable. You are running a commercial business from a residential property, and that is a direct violation of our HOA Covenant Section 12, subsection 4. I had read the HOA rules when I bought the house 3 years ago. I am working from home, which is explicitly allowed. I am not seeing clients here, I am not generating traffic, and everything is contained within my property. Patricia's jaw tightened. Those server racks constitute commercial equipment. This is not a home office, this is a data center. I will be filing a formal complaint, and you will need to remove all of that equipment within 30 days or face daily fines of $200. You cannot be serious, I said, feeling my blood pressure rise. Half the neighborhood works from home. John, 3 doors down, runs his entire architecture firm from his basement. John does not have industrial equipment visible from the street, Patricia snapped. And if you check your email, you will see that I have already sent the formal notice. Good day, Mr. Navarro. She turned on her heel and marched back to her white Lexus SUV, leaving me standing in my driveway, fuming. I went back inside and checked my email. Sure enough, there was a message from the HOA with multiple attachments, including photos of my garage, highlighted sections of the covenant, and a 30-day compliance notice. My wife Rachel was not going to be happy about this. We had just spent $15,000 on the server setup, the cooling system, and the electrical upgrades. I had pulled permits for everything, followed every building code, and made sure my business insurance was up to date. But apparently, that was not enough for Patricia Henderson. I spent the rest of the day researching HOA law in Colorado and making phone calls to attorneys. Most of them told me the same thing. HOAs had broad authority to enforce their covenants, and fighting them was expensive and time-consuming. One lawyer, a guy named Tom Breslin who specialized in HOA disputes, was more encouraging. The key question, Tom explained over the phone, is whether your use constitutes a home-based business or a commercial operation. If you are not seeing clients, not generating traffic, not creating noise or disturbance, and your equipment meets all building and safety codes, you have a strong case. But be prepared for them to escalate. What do you mean, escalate? HOAs like to use every tool at their disposal. They will look for any code violation, any excuse to pile on fines and pressure. Document everything, keep all your permits handy, and do not give them any ammunition. I thanked Tom and hung up, feeling slightly better but still anxious. Rachel came home that evening from her job as a high school chemistry teacher, and I broke the news to her. She was angry, but not at me. "That woman has been a nightmare since we moved here," Rachel said, pouring herself a glass of wine. "Remember when she tried to fine us because our mailbox was the wrong shade of black? Or when she measured our grass and claimed it was a quarter-inch too tall?" "I remember," I said. "But this is different. She is going after my business." Rachel squeezed my hand. "We will fight this. You have done everything right. She cannot just bully us into compliance." The next morning, I sent a detailed response to the HOA, citing the relevant sections of Colorado law regarding home-based businesses, attaching copies of all my permits, and respectfully declining to remove my equipment. I also included a letter from my insurance company confirming that my setup met all safety standards. Patricia's response came within 2 hours. She informed me that the HOA board would be conducting an emergency meeting to discuss my non-compliance, and that I was required to attend. The meeting was scheduled for Thursday evening at 7 o'clock at the community center. Thursday arrived with a fresh blanket of snow. Boulder had been getting hammered all week, and the forecast called for another 18 inches over the next few days. I bundled up and drove carefully to the community center, a small building at the entrance to our subdivision that mostly sat empty except for HOA meetings and the occasional kid's birthday party. Inside, the heating system was struggling against the cold. Patricia sat at a folding table at the front of the room, flanked by the other board members. Donald Krieger, a retired accountant who always looked vaguely confused, and Marilyn Sykes, a yoga instructor who seemed to agree with whatever Patricia said. About a dozen other residents sat in the audience, most of them there for entertainment rather than any real stake in the outcome. "This meeting will come to order," Patricia announced, banging a gavel that seemed ridiculously theatrical. "We are here to discuss the ongoing violation at 4827 Ridgemont Drive, the property of Mr. Frank Navarro. Mr. Navarro, you have received formal notice of your violation. Do you have anything to say?" I stood up, holding my folder of documents. "Yes, I do. Everything in my garage is fully permitted and up to code. I am running a home-based consulting business, which is explicitly allowed under Colorado law and is not prohibited by our HOA covenants. I am not generating any traffic noise or disturbance to my neighbors." Patricia shuffled some papers. "The covenant clearly states that commercial activities are prohibited." "It states that commercial activities that create a nuisance are prohibited," I corrected. "My business does not create any nuisance. I have letters from my immediate neighbors stating they have no objection to my setup." That was not entirely true yet, but I planned to get those letters over the weekend. Patricia's eyes narrowed. "This board has determined that your equipment constitutes a violation, regardless of permits or neighbor approval. The appearance of your property when the garage door is open creates an impression that is inconsistent with the residential character of this neighborhood." "So you want me to keep my garage door closed?" I said. "That is fine. I can do that." "You will remove the equipment entirely," Patricia said, her voice rising. "The compliance deadline stands. If you do not comply, we will pursue all available remedies, including daily fines, liens on your property, and legal action." I felt my temper flare but kept my voice level. "Then I guess we will see each other in court." The room went silent. Patricia's face turned red. "This meeting is adjourned." I left the community center feeling both vindicated and anxious. Taking on the HOA meant legal bills, stress, and potentially years of harassment. But I was not about to let Patricia Henderson destroy my business because she did not like the look of my server racks. The snow kept falling through the weekend. By Sunday night, we had accumulated nearly 2 feet, with more on the way. The city was struggling to keep up with plowing, and our subdivision's private streets were in rough shape. I spent most of Saturday and Sunday working in my garage with the door firmly closed, setting up my systems and onboarding my first major client, a medical software company based in Denver. Monday morning brought a fresh nightmare. I found a bright orange notice taped to my front door. It was not from the HOA this time. It was from the Boulder Fire Department, stating that I was in violation of Fire Code Section 42.3 regarding emergency egress and storage of equipment in residential garages. The notice demanded immediate compliance and warned that failure to remedy the violation could result in criminal charges. I stood in the snow, reading the notice 3 times, trying to make sense of it. I had pulled all the proper permits. The electrical inspector had signed off on everything. I had specifically asked about fire code requirements and had been told I was fine as long as I maintained proper clearances and had adequate fire suppression. Something was not right. I called the number on the notice and reached a clerk at the fire marshal's office. "Yes, we received a complaint about your property," the clerk confirmed. "Fire Marshal Davidson went out this morning to inspect." "A complaint from who?" I asked. "I cannot disclose that information, sir, but the violation is legitimate. You need to remedy it immediately." I hung up and immediately called Tom Breslin, my attorney. He was in court but called me back during lunch. "Let me guess," Tom said when I explained the situation. "Your HOA president called in the complaint." "That is what I am thinking." "But how did she get the fire marshal to cite me when I have all my permits?" Tom sighed. "Fire marshals have a lot of discretionary authority. If someone files a complaint, they have to investigate. Sometimes they interpret codes more strictly than building inspectors do." "Do you have the citation number?" I gave him the information and he promised to look into it. Meanwhile, I decided to go on the offensive. I took detailed photos of my entire garage setup, showing the clearances around all equipment, the fire extinguishers I had installed, and the smoke detectors. Then I drove to the fire marshal's office downtown. Fire Marshal Davidson was a stocky man in his 50s with a gray mustache and tired eyes. He agreed to meet with me after I waited for 40 minutes in the lobby. "Mr. Navarro," he said, shaking my hand. "I assume you are here about the citation." "Yes, sir, I am. I am confused because I pulled all the proper permits and the building inspector approved everything. I specifically asked about fire code compliance." Davidson pulled up a file on his computer. "The issue is not with your electrical work or your equipment per se. The issue is that your setup blocks one of your garage exits. Colorado Fire Code requires that all exits from any space be maintained clear and accessible at all times." I frowned. "My garage has one exit, the main door. And it is not blocked." "Your garage has 2 exits," Davidson corrected. "The main vehicle door and the side door that leads to your backyard. According to the complaint and my inspection, that side door is blocked by your server racks." He turned his monitor to show me photos from his inspection. Sure enough, my 3rd server rack, the one I had just installed, was positioned about a foot in front of the side door. I could still access the door, but not easily and not in an emergency. "That is a fair point," I admitted. "I can move that rack." I did not realize the side door counted as a required exit. Davidson nodded. "Move the rack so there is at least 3 feet of clear space in front of the door and we can close this out. I will need to re-inspect, but assuming you make the change, there should not be any problem." I thanked him and left, feeling both relieved and angry. Patricia had been right about the fire code violation, but only barely. And I suspected She had known exactly what to look for because she had been researching ways to nail me. I went home and spent the afternoon rearranging my garage. Moving the server rack was not simple because it was already mounted to the wall and had dozens of cables running to it, but I managed to shift everything about 3 feet to the left. By 6 o'clock, I had clear access to the side door and had taken new photos documenting the changes. The next morning, I called the fire marshal's office to schedule a reinspection. The earliest they could come out was Friday, which was fine with me. In the meantime, I focused on my actual work, onboarding my new client and trying to forget about the HOA drama. Wednesday evening brought the storm of the decade. The Weather Service had been tracking a massive system moving down from Canada, and it hit Boulder with a vengeance. By Thursday morning, we had another 18 inches of snow, with drifts in some places reaching 4 or 5 feet. The entire city essentially shut down. Schools were closed, roads were impassable, and everyone was told to stay home unless absolutely necessary. I worked from my garage, grateful for the warmth from my equipment and the reliable internet connection I had invested in. Rachel was home too, grading papers at the kitchen table and occasionally bringing me coffee. Friday morning, the snow finally stopped, but the city was buried. Our subdivision's private streets had not been plowed at all. The main roads were slowly being cleared, but it was going to be days before everything got back to normal. I called the fire marshal's office to confirm my reinspection appointment. "We are running behind due to the weather," the clerk told me. "Marshal Davidson will try to make it out this afternoon, but it might be Monday." "That is fine," I said. "I am not going anywhere." Davidson did show up, around 3 o'clock on Friday afternoon, driving a fire department SUV with chains on the tires. He trudged through the snow to my front door, looking exhausted. "Quite a storm," he said by way of greeting. "Worst I have seen since moving here," I agreed. We went to the garage and I showed him the changes I had made. The side door now had a full 3 feet of clearance, and I had even added a lighted exit sign above it for good measure. "This looks good," Davidson said, taking photos with his tablet. "You are in compliance now. I will close out the citation." "Thanks," I said. "I appreciate you coming out in this weather." Davidson hesitated, then lowered his voice. "Off the record, be careful with your HOA. The woman who filed the complaint, she was very insistent that I cite you for every possible violation. She even tried to get me to red tag your entire setup as a fire hazard. Let me guess, Patricia Henderson." Davidson did not confirm or deny, but his expression told me everything I needed to know. "Just watch your back," he said. "I have seen these neighborhood disputes get ugly." After he left, I went back inside and called Tom Breslin to update him. He was pleased that the fire code issue was resolved but warned me that Patricia was probably not done. "HOAs like this tend to double down when they face resistance," Tom said. "Expect more complaints, more citations, more pressure. Document everything and do not engage with her directly unless you have a witness." Tom's warning proved prophetic. The following Tuesday, after the city had finally dug itself out from the snow, I received another letter from the HOA. This time, Patricia was citing me for unauthorized modifications to my property, claiming that my electrical upgrades required HOA approval before the work was done. This was complete nonsense. The HOA covenant required notification for exterior modifications, not interior work, but she was clearly grasping at straws. I responded with another detailed letter, citing the relevant sections of the covenant and attaching copies of my building permits. I also sent a copy to every member of the HOA board, hoping that Donald and Marilyn might realize Patricia was going off the rails. The response came from Patricia's personal attorney, a guy named Richard Talbot who had a reputation as a bulldog. His letter was 3 pages of legalese that basically said the HOA had broad discretionary authority to interpret its covenants, and that if I did not comply within 14 days, they would file for an injunction to force me to remove my equipment. That was when I knew this was going to get expensive. I met with Tom Breslin in person at his office in downtown Boulder. Tom's office was small but organized, with walls covered in certificates and photos of him shaking hands with various Colorado politicians. "They are trying to bury you in legal costs," Tom explained. "That is the classic HOA strategy. They use the association's money to hire attorneys, which costs them very little on a per-household basis, but costs you everything out of pocket. They are betting you will give up before it gets to court." "I am not giving up," I said. "This is my business, my livelihood." Tom nodded. "Then we need to go on the offensive. I am going to file a motion for declaratory judgment, asking the court to rule that your home business is permitted under the covenant. We will also file a counterclaim for harassment and abuse of authority. That will put them on the defensive and maybe make them think twice about continuing this vendetta." "What will that cost?" Tom winced. "Initial filing and discovery, probably $15,000 to $20,000. If it goes to trial, could be 50 or more. I felt sick but nodded. "Do it." The next few weeks were a blur of legal documents, depositions, and stress. Tom filed our motion in Boulder County District Court, and Richard Talbot filed a response that was even more aggressive than his first letter. The HOA was now seeking not just removal of my equipment, but also attorney fees, fines totaling over $10,000 for my continued non-compliance, and a permanent injunction preventing me from operating any business from my property. The court scheduled a hearing for early April. In the meantime, life in Ridgemont Hills became increasingly uncomfortable. Patricia had apparently told her friends and allies in the neighborhood that I was the troublemaker, and I started getting cold shoulders at the mailbox and dirty looks when I walked my dog. A few neighbors were supportive, including Bill Marchand next door, who thought the whole thing was ridiculous, but most people just wanted to avoid the drama. Then came the second snowstorm. Colorado in March is unpredictable, and this storm was nearly as bad as the one in February. We got another 14 inches overnight on a Thursday, with howling winds that created massive drifts. I woke up Friday morning to find that the snow had completely blocked my front door, piling up to nearly 4 feet in some places. Rachel and I spent the morning digging out, and I noticed that several other houses in the neighborhood were similarly buried. The subdivision's private streets were covered in snow, and the contracted plow service was nowhere to be seen. By Friday afternoon, the neighborhood Facebook group was blowing up with complaints. People could not get their cars out, mail was not being delivered, and several residents were worried about emergency access. Patricia posted a message saying the plow service had been delayed but would be there soon. She also reminded everyone to keep their sidewalks clear per HOA rules, which struck me as tone-deaf given that most people could barely open their doors. Saturday morning, still no plows. I walked down to the entrance of the subdivision and saw that the main road had been cleared by the city, but our private streets remained untouched. I took photos and posted them to the Facebook group, asking when we could expect the plows. Patricia responded with a snippy comment about being patient and understanding that everyone was dealing with the storm. By Saturday afternoon, people were getting angry. One resident, Amy Porter, posted that her husband had a medical emergency and the ambulance had to park at the entrance of the subdivision because the streets were impassable. The paramedics had to trudge through waist-deep snow to reach their house. Several people demanded that Patricia explain what was going on with the plow service. That evening, Patricia finally admitted the truth. The plow service we had been using had gone out of business over the winter, and she had not yet secured a replacement. She was working on it, and expected to have someone there within the next few days. The neighborhood exploded. People were furious that Patricia had not informed them about the plow service situation, especially after such a major storm. Several residents demanded an emergency board meeting. Patricia reluctantly agreed to one on Tuesday evening. Meanwhile, I was dealing with my own snow problem. The side door of my garage, the one that had caused all the fire code drama, was completely buried under a massive drift. I spent Sunday morning trying to dig it out, but the snow was so deep and heavy that I barely made a dent. Eventually, I gave up and focused on keeping my driveway and front walk clear. Monday brought an unexpected visitor. Fire Marshal Davidson showed up at my door, looking even more tired than the last time I had seen him. "Mr. Navarro," he said, "I need to do another inspection of your property." My heart sank. "Another complaint from the HOA?" "Yes. They claim you are back in violation of the exit clearance requirements." I took him to the garage and showed him that everything inside was exactly as he had approved it. The server rack was still positioned with proper clearance from the door. "The problem is not inside," Davidson said. "The problem is outside. Your side exit is completely blocked by snow. That is a violation of the same fire code section." I stared at him in disbelief. "You are citing me for snow, the snow that fell naturally in a storm." "Not exactly," Davidson said, looking uncomfortable. "The code requires that all exits remain accessible. If a natural accumulation of snow blocks an exit, the property owner is responsible for clearing it within a reasonable time frame. I tried to clear it yesterday, but the drift is massive. And nobody else in the neighborhood has cleared their exits either." Davidson nodded. "I understand, and normally we would not cite someone for this during a major storm, but I received a formal complaint and I have to follow up. I am going to give you 48 hours to clear the exit. If it is still blocked after that, I will have to issue a citation." After he left, I was absolutely furious. Patricia was now using natural disasters to harass me. I called Tom Breslin and left a voicemail explaining the situation. Then I bundled up and spent the next 3 hours attacking the snowdrift with a shovel, a snow blower, and pure rage as fuel. By Monday evening, I had cleared enough of the drift that the side door could open, though it was a struggle. I took photos and emailed them to Davidson's office, documenting that the exit was now accessible. I was exhausted, sore, and angrier than I had been in years. The emergency HOA meeting on Tuesday evening was packed. Nearly 50 residents showed up, which was unheard of for our neighborhood. People were still angry about the streets, which had finally been plowed on Monday afternoon by an emergency service that charged the HOA a fortune. Patricia tried to control the meeting, but the residents were not having it. Person after person stood up to complain about the lack of communication regarding the plow service, the dangerous conditions over the weekend, and Patricia's general mismanagement of the association. Several people called for her resignation. In the middle of the chaos, I stood up. "I would like to add something," I said. "Patricia has been using HOA resources to conduct a personal vendetta against me. She has filed multiple frivolous complaints, including one that resulted in the fire marshal citing me for having snow in front of my garage exit during a blizzard." The room went silent. People turned to look at me, then at Patricia. "That is a lie," Patricia said, her face flushing. I filed legitimate complaints about your violations. Then explain this, I said, pulling out my phone. I had prepared for this moment. This is an email from Fire Marshal Davidson's office, dated last Monday. It says a complaint was filed about my property at 10:45 a.m., which was before the city had even finished plowing the main roads. The complaint specifically mentioned my side exit being blocked by snow. I held up my phone showing a photo of my garage. This is my garage from the outside. My side exit faces the greenbelt behind my house. The only way someone could know it was blocked by snow is if they walked around to the back of my house, through waist-deep snow, to inspect it. Who do you think did that, Patricia? Patricia stood up, trembling with anger. I have every right to ensure compliance with safety codes. Your equipment is a hazard and you have been non-compliant from the start. The fire marshal cleared my equipment, I shot back. The only thing I was cited for was snow. Natural snow from a storm. And you had to have been trespassing on my property to even know about it. The room erupted in shouting. Several residents were now demanding Patricia's immediate removal from the board. Marilyn Sykes, who had been silent through most of the meeting, suddenly spoke up. I did not know you were filing additional complaints, Marilyn said to Patricia. You told us at the board meeting in February that the issue with Mr. Navarro had been resolved. It was not resolved, Patricia snapped. He refused to comply. He complied with the fire code citation, Donald Krieger interjected, looking at a paper in front of him. I have the clearance letter from the fire marshal right here. Patricia looked around the room, realizing she was losing control. This meeting is out of order. We will reconvene when people can conduct themselves appropriately. No, said Bill Marchand, standing up. We are voting right now. I move for a vote of no confidence in Patricia Henderson as HOA president. The vote was not even close. Patricia was removed as president by a count of 43-5. Marilyn Sykes was appointed interim president, and the meeting finally adjourned around 10 p.m. I drove home feeling vindicated but also drained. Rachel had watched the meeting via Zoom and hugged me when I walked in the door. You did it, she said. You stood up to her. It is not over yet, I said. We still have the court hearing next month, but I was wrong about that. 2 weeks later, Tom Breslin called me with news. The HOA's attorney has filed a motion to dismiss their claims, Tom said. With Patricia out as president, the new board reviewed the case and decided it was not worth pursuing. They are dropping everything, the demands to remove your equipment, the fines, all of it. I almost could not believe it. What about our counterclaim? They want to settle that too. They are offering to pay your attorney fees and issue a formal letter stating that your home business is in full compliance with HOA rules. I think you should take it. I agreed immediately. A week later, I had a check for $18,000 covering Tom's fees and a letter from the HOA stating that my setup was approved. It was finally over, or so I thought. In early May, I received a call from Fire Marshal Davidson. He asked if I could meet him at his office, and something in his tone made me nervous. When I arrived, Davidson ushered me into a conference room where 2 other people were waiting. One was a woman in a business suit who introduced herself as Deputy Fire Marshal Lisa Chang. The other was a city attorney named Marcus Dennett. Mr. Navarro, thank you for coming in, Davidson said. We wanted to talk to you about the complaints that were filed against you earlier this year. I sat down warily. Okay. Chang opened a folder. We have been conducting an investigation into Patricia Henderson's conduct as HOA president. As part of that investigation, we reviewed all the fire code complaints filed for Ridgemont Hills over the past 2 years. What we found is troubling. She laid out several documents. Miss Henderson filed 17 fire code complaints in 2 years, which is highly unusual for a residential neighborhood. What is more unusual is that 13 of those complaints were about homes owned by people who had some kind of dispute with the HOA. Davidson continued. The complaint about your snow-blocked exit was the final straw. When I went back and reviewed the photos Miss Henderson submitted, I realized she had to have been on your property in your backyard to take those photos. That is trespassing. Marcus Dennett, the city attorney, leaned forward. But what really concerns us is that several of Miss Henderson's complaints appear to have been false or exaggerated. In 2 cases, she claimed there were blocked exits or fire hazards that did not actually exist. That is filing a false report, which is a criminal offense. I sat back, processing this information. Are you saying Patricia is being charged with a crime? We are presenting the case to the district attorney's office, Dennett said. But we wanted to talk to you first because you are the most recent victim of her conduct. We would like you to provide a statement and potentially testify if this goes to trial. I agreed without hesitation. Over the next hour, I gave them a detailed account of everything that had happened, from Patricia's initial complaint about my server racks to the snow-blocked exit citation. I provided copies of all the documents, emails, and photos I had collected. 2 weeks later, Patricia Henderson was charged with 3 counts of filing a false report and 1 count of criminal trespass. The story made the local news, and the Ridgemont Hills neighborhood was buzzing with gossip. Some people felt sorry for Patricia, but most were angry about how she had abused her authority as HOA president. The case moved slowly through the court system. Patricia hired an expensive defense attorney who tried to get the charges dismissed, arguing that she had been acting in good faith to enforce community standards. The DA was not buying it. In October, Patricia accepted a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to 1 count of filing a false report and was sentenced to 6 months of probation, community service, and a $5,000 fine. She was also banned from serving on any HOA board in Colorado for 10 years. The whole experience taught me several important lessons about HOAs, power, and standing up for yourself. After Patricia was removed and the legal case was settled, life in Ridgemont Hills gradually returned to normal. Marilyn Sykes turned out to be a reasonable and competent HOA president. She focused on actual community issues like maintaining the common areas and organizing neighborhood events, rather than harassing homeowners over petty violations. My business thrived. The medical software company I had onboarded in February became a major client, and word of mouth brought me several more. Working from home with my server setup in the garage proved to be incredibly efficient, and I never regretted fighting to keep it. Rachel and I became more active in the neighborhood, making an effort to build relationships with our neighbors and participate in HOA meetings. I even joined the Architectural Review Committee, partly to ensure that no future homeowner would be subjected to the kind of harassment I had experienced. Bill Marchand, my next-door neighbor, became a good friend. He had been one of the first people to speak up at that heated February meeting, and his support throughout the ordeal meant a lot to me. We started having regular backyard barbecues in the summer, and our wives became close friends as well. The irony of the whole situation was not lost on me. Patricia had called the fire marshal on my setup, hoping to shut down my business and force me to comply with her interpretation of the HOA rules. Instead, the fire marshal ended up citing her for her own violations. The blocked exit she was so concerned about was caused by natural snowfall during one of the worst winters Boulder had seen in decades, and her obsessive documentation of that snow led directly to her downfall. I learned that sometimes the best way to deal with a bully is to stand your ground, document everything, and trust that the truth will eventually come out. I also learned that HOAs can be a force for good in a community when they are run by reasonable people focused on actual community needs, rather than power trips and personal vendettas. The following year, when the fire code story came full circle, I had an opportunity to help someone else in a similar situation. A new homeowner in the neighborhood, a woman named Susan who ran a photography business from her home, received a complaint about her home studio. She was panicked, afraid she would have to shut down her business or sell her house. I met with Susan and walked her through everything I had learned. I helped her document that her studio was in compliance with all codes, connected her with Tom Breslin, and spoke on her behalf at the HOA meeting where her case was discussed. Marilyn Sykes quickly determined that Susan's studio was perfectly acceptable and dismissed the complaint, which had been filed by one of Patricia's old allies, who still harbored resentment about the previous board's removal. The experience reinforced something I had realized during my own battle. Communities are strongest when people stand up for each other and refuse to let petty tyrants run roughshod over their neighbors. HOAs can serve a valuable purpose in maintaining property values and organizing community resources. But they need oversight and accountability, just like any other organization with authority over people's lives. By the time winter rolled around again, I had almost forgotten about the drama of the previous year. Almost. The first major snowstorm of the season brought back memories, but this time I was prepared. I made sure all my exits were kept clear, not because I was afraid of another citation, but because it was the smart and safe thing to do. The HOA hired a reliable plow service with a backup plan in case of equipment failure. Maryland instituted a new policy requiring the board to notify homeowners immediately about any issues with community services. The transparency was refreshing and helped rebuild trust in the HOA after Patricia's reign. I ran into Patricia once, about a year after her conviction, at a grocery store in Boulder. She saw me from across the produce section and quickly turned her cart around, clearly wanting to avoid any interaction. I felt a flash of vindication but also a strange sense of pity. She had let her need for control destroy her reputation, cost her thousands of dollars in legal fees and fines, and resulted in a criminal record. All because she could not accept that someone was running a quiet, legal home business in a residential neighborhood. My business continued to grow. I ended up hiring 2 employees who worked remotely from their own homes, and I rented a small office space in downtown Boulder for client meetings. But the server setup in my garage remained the heart of my operation, humming quietly and efficiently, exactly as I had designed it. The legal bills from the HOA fight took about a year to fully recover from financially, even with the settlement money. But the experience was worth it in ways that went beyond money. I learned how to navigate the legal system, how to stand up to intimidation, and how to build a coalition of support in my community. Those lessons proved valuable not just in my personal life, but in my business as well. Rachel often joked that I should write a book about the experience, something like How to Survive Your HOA Karen. I would laugh and tell her that nobody would believe it. But the truth was, stories like mine were more common than people realized. All across America, homeowners were fighting similar battles against overzealous HOA boards, dealing with petty enforcement of arbitrary rules, and struggling to maintain their property rights in the face of neighborhood politics. The key to winning those battles, I discovered, was documentation, persistence, and community support. Patricia had counted on me giving up, on the legal costs and stress becoming too much to bear. She had assumed that her position as HOA president gave her unlimited authority to harass anyone she disagreed with. She was wrong on both counts. The fire code twist was particularly satisfying because it highlighted the absurdity of her crusade against me. She had been so obsessed with finding violations that she had resorted to trespassing on my property during a blizzard to photograph a snow-blocked exit. The image of Patricia trudging through waist-deep snow in her expensive North Face jacket, phone in hand, trying to document a code violation, was both ridiculous and sad. But her obsession ultimately led to justice. If she had not filed that complaint about the snow, if Fire Marshal Davidson had not started questioning the pattern of complaints, if the city attorney had not launched an investigation, Patricia might have continued abusing her authority for years. Instead, her downfall was swift and public, and it sent a message to every HOA board member in Boulder County that there were consequences for abusing power. The resolution of my case had ripple effects throughout Ridgemont Hills. Several other homeowners who had been quietly dealing with harassment from the previous board came forward with their own stories. One couple had been fined repeatedly for minor landscaping issues. Another homeowner had been threatened with legal action over a basketball hoop in his driveway. The new board reviewed all these cases and reversed most of the previous decisions, issuing refunds for unfair fines and updating the HOA rules to be more reasonable. The Architectural Review Committee, which I had joined, became much more focused on actual aesthetics and property maintenance rather than nitpicking over inches and shades of color. We developed clear guidelines and tried to work with homeowners to find solutions rather than immediately resorting to violations and fines. I also worked with Bill Marchand and several other neighbors to draft a new set of bylaws for the HOA that included term limits for board members, requirements for financial transparency, and a formal appeals process for homeowners who disagreed with board decisions. These changes were approved by a vote of the homeowners in March, and they fundamentally changed the culture of the HOA from authoritarian to collaborative. Looking back on the entire experience, from that first knock on my garage door to Patricia's conviction and beyond, I realized that it had fundamentally changed me. I had always been someone who avoided conflict, who tried to go along to get along. But standing up to Patricia and the HOA board had taught me that sometimes conflict is necessary. That sometimes you have to fight for what is right even when it is expensive and exhausting. The server racks in my garage, which had been the source of so much drama, became something of a neighborhood legend. When new homeowners moved in and asked about the HOA, someone would inevitably tell them the story of how the previous HOA president tried to shut down a home business and ended up getting charged with filing false police reports. The story usually ended with someone pointing at my house and saying, "That is where it all went down." I appreciated the support, but I tried not to dwell too much on the past. My focus was on building my business, spending time with Rachel, and enjoying life in Boulder. The HOA drama had been an unwelcome distraction, but it was over now, and I was determined not to let it define me. The following spring, I was invited to speak at a regional meeting of HOA board members and property managers about my experience. The event organizers wanted someone who had been through an HOA dispute to provide the homeowner perspective. I was hesitant at first, but Rachel encouraged me to do it. The presentation took place at a hotel conference room in Denver. About 60 people attended, mostly HOA board members and community managers from around the metro area. I spoke for 30 minutes about my experience, focusing on what went wrong and how it could have been avoided. I emphasized the importance of clear communication, reasonable enforcement of rules, and treating homeowners with respect rather than suspicion. The questions afterward were revealing. Several board members admitted they had board presidents or committee chairs who acted like Patricia, using their positions to settle personal scores or enforce their own preferences rather than the community's actual rules. A few property managers said they had seen HOA disputes spiral out of control because board members refused to back down even when they were clearly in the wrong. One question stuck with me. A woman from an HOA in Littleton asked, "How do you balance enforcing community standards with respecting individual property rights? Where do you draw the line?" I thought about it for a moment before answering. I think the line is whether someone's actions are actually harming the community or just violating someone's personal preferences. If a homeowner paints their house neon orange, that affects property values and the character of the neighborhood. If a homeowner runs a quiet consulting business from their garage who is actually being harmed, HOAs exist to protect the community, not to control every aspect of people's lives. When you lose sight of that distinction, you end up with situations like mine. The room was quiet, and I could see several people nodding in agreement. After the presentation, multiple board members came up to thank me for sharing my story and to ask for more details about how we had reformed our HOA in Ridgemont Hills. I left the conference feeling like maybe some good had come from the whole ordeal after all. By the time summer arrived, my business was doing well enough that I started thinking about expansion. I looked at renting a larger office space or even buying a small commercial building. But every time I ran the numbers, it made more sense to keep my primary operations in my garage. The overhead was minimal, the setup was efficient, and I had finally earned the peace of mind that comes with knowing my space was legal, safe, and approved by everyone who mattered. The bitter irony was that if Patricia had just left me alone, none of the drama would have happened. My server racks would have hummed quietly in my garage, invisible to everyone except the occasional delivery driver. But her need to control and punish had set in motion a chain of events that destroyed her reputation, cost her money and time, and ultimately led to criminal charges. Fire Marshal Davidson and I crossed paths one more time, at a community safety fair in Boulder that fall. He was manning a booth about fire safety in the home, and I stopped by to say hello. "Mr. Navarro," he said, shaking my hand warmly. "Good to see you. How is everything going?" "Great," I said. "No more snow blocking my exits," he laughed. That was one of the strangest cases I have ever dealt with. I have been doing this job for 22 years, and I have never had someone file a complaint about natural snow accumulation during a blizzard. "It all worked out in the end," I said. "Thank you for taking the time to investigate properly. A lot of people in your position might have just rubber-stamped whatever the HOA president claimed." Davidson nodded. "That is actually something we are training on now. HOA complaints can be legitimate, but they can also be weaponized. We are teaching our inspectors to look at the full context and to question complaints that seem motivated by personal disputes rather than genuine safety concerns." That conversation reinforced something I had been thinking about for months. My experience was not just about one vindictive HOA president. It was about a larger problem with how HOAs operate in America, with how much power they have over homeowners' lives, and with how easily that power can be abused when there are no checks and balances. I started doing more research into HOA reform efforts around the country. I discovered that Colorado actually had relatively strong protections for homeowners compared to some states, but that enforcement was inconsistent, and many homeowners did not know their rights. I connected with a nonprofit group working on HOA reform legislation and started volunteering with them, helping to draft proposed changes to state law that would increase transparency and accountability for HOA boards. The work was not glamorous, mostly attending legislative committee meetings and writing letters to representatives, but it felt important. If my experience could help prevent other homeowners from going through the same ordeal, then maybe it had all been worth it. Rachel supported my activism, though she sometimes worried I was spending too much time dwelling on the past. But I did not see it that way. I saw it as taking something negative and turning it into something positive, using my experience to help others and maybe make a small difference in how HOAs operate. By the second anniversary of that first knock on my garage door, my life had changed in ways I never could have anticipated. My business was successful and growing. I had become an advocate for HOA reform. I had a deeper appreciation for the importance of community and standing up for what is right. And I had a story that people found both entertaining and instructive. The server racks were still humming in my garage, right where they belonged. The side exit was clear, with proper clearance both inside and outside. My permits were in order, my insurance was current, and my relationship with the HOA was cordial and professional. Patricia Henderson, as far as I knew, had moved away from Boulder. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she and her husband had sold their house and relocated somewhere in Arizona. I did not wish her ill, but I did not miss her either. She had taught me valuable lessons about standing up to bullies, but those lessons had come at a high cost for everyone involved. The final chapter of the story came in the form of a letter I received in December, almost 2 years after everything started. It was from the Colorado Division of Fire Prevention and Control, thanking me for my cooperation in their investigation and informing me that they had implemented new training protocols for fire marshals across the state regarding HOA-related complaints. The letter noted that my case had been used as an example in the training materials, and they appreciated my willingness to speak about my experience. I showed the letter to Rachel that evening over dinner. "I guess something good came out of all this after all," I said. "A lot of good came out of it," Rachel corrected. "You stood up for yourself. You helped reform the HOA. You are working on legislation that could help thousands of homeowners. And you built a successful business despite all the obstacles Patricia threw at you. That is more than something. That is everything." She was right. The HOA had called the fire marshal on my setup, trying to shut me down and force me out. Instead, the fire marshal had ended up citing them for blocked exits under 3 feet of snow, and their abuse of authority had led to criminal charges and lasting reforms. Justice had prevailed, slowly and imperfectly, but undeniably. My garage door was closed as I finished up some work that evening, the server racks casting their familiar glow, the cooling fans providing a steady white noise. Outside, fresh snow was starting to fall, the first significant accumulation of the season. But this time I was not worried. My exits were clear. My permits were in order. And most importantly, the people who had tried to use code enforcement as a weapon against me were no longer in a position to do so. I thought about all the homeowners out there who were facing similar battles with their HOAs, who were being harassed over petty violations or having their lives controlled by power-hungry board members. I hoped that my story and the reforms it had helped inspire would make things a little bit easier for them. Nobody should have to fight as hard as I did just to run a legal business from their home. The snow continued to fall as I shut down my systems for the night and headed inside. Rachel had made hot chocolate, and we sat together on the couch, watching the snow accumulate outside our window. It was peaceful and quiet, the kind of evening that made me grateful for my home, my neighborhood, and the hard-won knowledge that I could stand up for myself when it mattered most. The server racks would still be there in the morning, ready for another day of work. The exits would remain clear, the permits would remain valid, and life in Ridgemont Hills would continue on, improved by the lessons we had all learned from Patricia Henderson's failed crusade against a home-based IT consultant who refused to back down. And if another HOA president ever tried to pull the same kind of stunt, well, there was now a precedent. There were new training protocols for fire marshals. There were reformed bylaws and stronger protections for homeowners. The path I had cleared through that legal and bureaucratic snowstorm would make it easier for the next person who had to walk it. That thought brought me comfort as I finished my hot chocolate and prepared for bed. The battle was over. The victory was complete. And tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing that my server racks would keep humming in my garage, exactly where they belonged, protected by law and precedent, and the hard-earned respect of my community.